everyone. I'm going to read one of my favourite stories with you today. It is a story by the author Dick King-Smith and it's called The Hodgeheg. This is the actual book that I had when I was in year 3 or 4. The Hodgeheg by Dick King-Smith. Chapter 1. Your Auntie Betty has copped it, said Pa Hedgehog to Ma. Oh no, cried Ma. Where? Just down the road, opposite the newsagent's. Bad place to cross, that is. Everywhere's a bad place to cross nowadays, said Ma. The traffic's dreadful. Do you realise, Pa, that is the 3rd this year, and all on my side of the family too? First there was Grandfather, then my second cousin once removed, and now poor old Aunt Betty. They were sitting in a flower bed at their home, the garden of number 5A, a row of semi-detached houses in a suburban street. On the other side of the road was a park, very popular with local hedgehogs on account of the good hunting it offered, as well as worms and slugs and snails which they could get in their own gardens. There were special attractions in the park. Mice lived under the bandstand, feeding on the crumbs dropped from listeners' sandwiches. Frogs dwelt in the lily pond, and in the ornamental gardens, grass snakes slithered through the shrubbery. All these creatures were regarded as great delicacies by the hedgehogs, and they could never resist the occasional night sport in the park. But to reach it, they had to cross a busy road. Poor old Auntie Betty, said Ma again. It's a hard life, and that's flat. It's a hard death, said Pa sourly, and that's flat too. Talk about squashed. The poor girl was... Shh, said Ma, the sound of approaching footsteps. Not in front of the children, as up trotted 4 small figures, exact miniatures of their parents, except that their spines were still greyish rather than brown. 3 of them were little sows, named by Ma, who was fond of flowers, Pony, Pansy and Petunia. Pa had agreed reluctantly to these names, but had insisted upon his choice for the 4th, a little boar. Boys, he said, needed noble-sounding names, and the 4th youngster was therefore called Victor Maximilian St. George, or Max for short. Almost from the moment his eyes had opened, while his prickles were still soft and rubbery, Max had shown the promise of being a bright boy, and now his eyes and ears and his wits were all as sharp as his spines on his back. Was you talking about, Ma? He said. Nothing, said Ma hastily. You wouldn't be talking about nothing, said Max. Well, there wouldn't be any point talking. Don't be cheeky, said Pa, and mind your own business. Well, I suppose it is their business really, Pa. Isn't it, said Ma, or soon will be. They're bound to go out exploring our garden before long, and we must warn them. You're right, said Pa. Now then, you kids, listen to me. And he proceeded to give his children a long lecture about the problems of road safety for hedgehogs. Max listened carefully. Then he said, Do humans cross the road? I suppose so, said Pa. But they don't get killed. Don't think so, said Pa. Never seen one lying in the road, which I would have if they did. Well then, said Max, how do they get across safely? You tell me, son, you tell me, said Pa. I will, said Max, I will. Chapter 2. Max began his research the very next day. He slipped out of the garden at dusk, ambled along the path by the side of the wall at number 5A, and crept under the front gate. Immediately, he found himself in a sea of noise. It was the evening rush hour and the homecoming traffic was at its heaviest. Cars and motorbikes, buses and lorries thundered past, terrifyingly close. It seemed to him, as he crouched outside the gate, and he was confused and dazzled by their lights. The street lamps lit up too, and it lit the place up like daytime. And Max, nocturnal by nature, made for the darkest spot he could find, in the shadow of a tall litter bin, and crouched there with a hammering heart. Gradually, He grew a little more accustomed to the din and the glare, and though he dared not move, began to observe the humans, for numbers of pedestrians passed close by him. They were all walking on the narrow road on which he sat, a road raised above the level of the street itself by about the height of a hedgehog. "They're safe," said Max to himself, "because the noisy monsters aren't allowed up here." He looked across the street and could see that at the far side of it there were other humans also walking safely, on a similar raised road. He did not, however, happen to see any across the street. "But they must cross somewhere," said Max. "There must be a place further along the street." A part of him, for he was very young, said he would find out about that another time, and it would be nice to creep back under the gate to his family. But then another part of him, determined to set off to see if he could find this human crossing place. The street was on a slight slope, and perhaps because of this, Max chose to go in a downhill direction. He moved very slowly, keeping close to the outer walls of the front gardens, where there was still some shadow, and he froze, stock still, whenever a human passed. No one noticed him. Soon the houses gave way to a short row of shops. One of them, that was the newsagent's, opposite which his great-aunt Betty had breathed her last, and where his progress was more difficult. The shops were still open, you see, and Max had to choose his moment to make a dash across each brightly lit entrance. "Phew! This is tiring. Perhaps I should go back home," he said, but then suddenly, not far ahead, he saw what he was seeking. There were humans crossing the street, sometimes singly, sometimes in twos and threes, and sometimes in quite large groups. They stepped down from the narrow raised road and walked straight across the street with hardly a look to the left or right, and stepped up again on the far side, and off they went. And every time that anyone wanted to cross, all the traffic stopped and waited respectfully until the way was clear again. This, then, was the magic place. Here humans could cross in perfect safety. If humans can, why not hedgehogs, reasoned Max. But how do people know the exact spot? And how do cars and lorries know when to stop? Cautiously, he shuffled nearer, keeping close to the wall until he found himself beside a checkered tall pole, on top of which was a glowing orange globe. Across the street he could see a similar pole, and between these two poles the humans walked while the traffic waited. Biding his time till a moment when there was no one about, Max crept forward to the edge of the raised road and peered down at the surface on the street. It was striped. It was striped black and white all the way from one side to the other. This was the secret. And that's where I'm going to leave it today. What do you think Max spotted on the road?